On May 1st, 2025, President Donald Trump signed an executive order forming a commission to report on religious liberty in the United States. It is believed by people in the Trump administration that religious liberties have been under attack. And what is under attack? Well, the First Amendment rights of freedom of religious expression. There is a belief that freedom of religion is being hamstrung by the misunderstanding of separation of church and state. Now, this phrase is not in the Constitution. So where did this concept come from? It comes from the First Amendment under the Establishment Clause, where this government will make no laws respecting an establishment of religion, which means that the United States will not have a mandatory religion. The term separation of church and state was a phrase coined by former President Thomas Jefferson in an 1802 letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. In the letter, he references the Establishment Clause to define his famous phrase. And then you have the Free Exercise Clause, which means you have the legal right to practice any religion. You also have the right to not be forced to participate in religious practices or comply with certain religious doctrine. So if you don't want to participate in a prayer service or celebrate a holiday because of a belief, you have a right. If you want to organize a Bible study outside of church, you have a right. If you want to have time and room to do salat, you have a legal right. It is when people force you to do these things when your rights are violated. It is also a violation when these expressions are suppressed. A couple of days ago, the Commission on Religious Liberty reported their findings and gave recommendations. But before I get into that, we have to understand the makeup of the commission. You have the main commission members of 15 people. This commission is headed by Lieutenant Governor of Texas, Dan Patrick, not the former ESPN sportscaster, but the ultra-conservative Texas politician. The next level of membership is made up of 11 faith leaders, called the Religious Advisory Board. Then the next level is the Legal Advisory, consisting of 6 legal experts. The last level is 7 lay advisory members of people who are not clergy, but connected to a religious organization. In the commission's finding, they came with 12 recommendations. I'm not going to go over all 12, so I suggest you read them. However, here are a few that are problematic. The first recommendation is clarifying the proper understanding of the Establishment Clause and separation of church and state, which sounds like the liberty to violate the Establishment Clause. Recommendation 3 and 4 of creating mandatory written reporting and creating hotlines for violation of religious liberties sounds like intimidation to non-religious people. The 7th recommendation prioritizes fighting anti-Semitism, but nowhere in the recommendations does it consider anti-Islamic rhetoric and violence. Number 9 is asking to repeal the Johnson Amendment, a tax code that prevents religious nonprofit organizations from using funds to support or oppose political candidates. It's bad enough that corporations are buying elections. Now churches will have the ability to purchase candidates as well if this act is repealed. These are some of the recommendations that I found were questionable. However, what was worse was the makeup of the commission. Composed mostly of Christian and Jewish conservatives, the only person of Islamic faith is Ismail Royer, a person buried in the advisory board for lay leaders. And by the way, Royer, who is formerly known as Randall Todd Royer, was part of the group called the Virginia Jihad Network. He pleaded guilty to aiding and abetting terrorist activities in Afghanistan. It's interesting that hardly anyone outside of Christian and Jewish faiths were called to participate, and the testimonies were even more slanted. Yes, there was legit cases of legal violations of people's freedom of religious expression. However, what was excluded was the testimony of people who were victimized in anti-Muslim hate crimes. No one from the Islamic Center in San Diego was interviewed for their anti-Islamic shooting they suffered earlier this year. There was even an odd exclusion of Christian churches and school shootings. No one from Covenant School in Nashville was asked about their 2023 school shooting. No one from Emmanuel AME in Charleston, South Carolina was called to testify about their 2015 massacre at a Bible study. And then you have no one testifying from the Annunciation Catholic Church shooting in 2025. And what's crazy is that you have Catholic bishops in this committee and they say nothing. If I'm wrong about this, please put this in the comments. The whole thing is not about protecting religious liberties or protecting a political agenda. This is not about protecting religious freedom. This is about protecting the religion of white supremacy. Because in their rhetoric, their worship is not about God or Jesus, but whiteness.